President Joe Biden is visiting the United Auto Workers picket line in Wayne County, Michigan today, a first for a sitting president, and according to CNN, he'll be joined by UAW President Shawn Fain. Biden posted his support on X for the labor movement shaking up the auto industry, but also in Hollywood, where a tentative deal was reached over the weekend to end the writer's strike. Writing, quote, all workers, including writers, actors, and auto workers, deserve a fair share of the value they helped create.
Meanwhile, on Tuesday, the United Farm Workers endorsed Biden's re-election effort. The union's president, Teresa Romero, wrote, quote, United Farm Workers have seen firsthand the positive impact that President Biden has made in the economic standing, labor rights, and daily lives of farm workers across America. I mean, no surprise there, Bree, that the union decided to endorse the president. But I guess my question for you...
The Farm Workers Union, just to be clear.
The Farm Workers, yeah, let me be clear
UAW.
on that. Do you think that the president, though, has sort of done enough for working class people?
Of course not. But he's hoping that the fact that we live in a corporately captured two-party system means that him doing more, quite a bit more than Donald Trump is enough. And Republicans make it easy for Democrats to do the bare minimum by doing nothing at all. And very little is actually delivered for the American people because both corporate parties do a great deal to prevent a third-party alternative from emerging. So here we are.
Yeah, I mean, even, Nikki Haley, I think, made some interesting comments about Tim Scott's remarks on just fire the workers. And I just kept thinking to myself, like, what group of Americans are you trying to target with that statement? I mean, because many Republicans are working class people. Now, they may not belong to a union necessarily, but...
Yeah, unfortunately, many of them don't belong to unions because in red states, they have really draconian rules to block people from being able to organize their workplace. These so-called right-to-work states, very cleverly branded, but they prevent many workers in the South from being able to do exactly what these auto workers are doing, which is to, in all likelihood, successfully lobby for fair pay.
A political win for the president, then. Is it fair to say that, you think?
I think so. I think so. But the idea of Republicans alienating labor and not having a really compelling message for working class people outside of culture war issues has been something that's been going on for decades. Donald Trump, it looked like he was trying to turn that around back in 2016 when he was critical of bipartisan legislation like NAFTA, and the consequence of which was American jobs being sent overseas so that we could earn a few more pennies on the dollar for executives, while Americans lost their livelihood, and we saw the decimation of all of those towns in the Midwest. And Donald Trump went around the Midwest and said, we're going to bring these jobs back, we're going to build these factories. That didn't exactly come to fruition.
It's so funny you say that. Ron DeSantis posted, his campaign posted a video, I think a couple days ago, with Trump making all of these promises, and DeSantis was pretty much like, you didn't do any of these things for hardworking people. And when I looked at the responses, they were all criticizing. I mean, this is so crazy.
Criticizing Ron DeSantis?
They were criticizing DeSantis, saying, well, why are you going after Trump? And I thought to myself, like, well, guys, I mean, he actually is pointing out what Trump stated and saying what Trump didn't do. I'm not saying you can't support Trump, but again, we should be able to be critical.
People should be holding Trump accountable for his own campaign promises. I mean, if you like Trump, fine.
That's okay.
But your goal should be to push him to be the person that he said he was going to be. Don't validate him just for, punching the air during a rally or saying the funny thing. I mean, he's a funny guy. You should be validated. How secure do you have to be in life? How little do you need? How wealthy do you have to be more invested in whether or not a politician says the right things about a trans person when you probably never met a trans person in your entire life, when you are in a country that, I'm sorry to have to be a broken record, has not had a minimum wage raise in the longest period of time since the invention of the minimum wage, like in 1938.
I think that the point that the DeSantis camp was making was that, which was a very salient point, which is that Republicans need to have a response to the Democratic response in terms of workers and these strikes. I think these strikes are going to continue. You and I had a really unique conversation yesterday about what some of my positions would be as a conservative and how I would try to work with workers and empower workers and pay them a fair wage. And I know we had some disagreement there, Bree, but I do think it's possible to have a pro-capitalist, pro-conservative message for workers. And we're not even seeing any effort, I would argue, from most of the Republican candidates in that regard. And I personally would like to see that.
No, it's been trickle-down economics for 50 years. It's been, well, the CEO pay is high, and don't worry, somehow that $24 million a year salary is going to come down to you, worker, who sacrificed and made cuts to your pension programs when there was the auto crisis in 2008. But while the industry has recovered and while the billionaires at the top of the work hierarchy have recovered, you are earning inflation-adjusted wages that are worse, not only worse than they were in 2008, but worse than they were in 1980.
Yeah, and one of the things, I mean, so for the audience, you guys are probably wondering what I'm talking about. Bree raised interesting points to me. She said, well, Shermichael, what if we permitted a worker to be a part of the board of a company? I actually agreed with that. My position, I said, well, if I were a CEO, I think there are some very tangible things that a worker, someone who's in the weeds, would be able to bring to the table that everyone else in that boardroom just won't be able to. They don't have the experience. Most of them haven't struggled in God knows how long. I think there's valuable insight there. Bree mentioned the point of workers having an ownership stake in the company.
Yeah, or worker ownership, worker cooperatives is
I didn't necessarily disagree with that. I said I would want a stock option. Bree wanted a different option. So again, guys, the point that I'm trying to make here is Bree and I may want to approach this differently, but what I'm trying to say is that I think a conservative Bree can make the case for workers and still hold true to their conservative values. I don't have an issue with the CEO necessarily making good money, but I also want the people who are doing the labor to also do well. I mentioned a Harvard study that a friend of mine sent a while ago to Bree that studied some companies in Silicon Valley, and what they showcase is when workers are paid well, there's good health care, et cetera, that the work output is greater, thus leading to greater revenue for the company. To me, I would think any conservative person who likes to make money would say that is a net gain for all of the investors, the board members, all the way down to the average worker. So why not adopt some of those positions and articulate them to the American people?
I certainly agree that there are conservative values that we could agree about. I think that they include helping your neighbor, not letting people go hungry, providing for people in your community. But unfortunately, those values contrast very sharply with the political conservative approach to politics, which operates on the singular principle of maximizing profit. And if you singularly value maximizing profit, that means shipping a job overseas if it's going to make the members of the board and shareholders a fraction of a dollar more, even if it devastates communities. It means not investing into the company for long-term benefit of the company, improving personnel, improving training people, improving the technology you're using, investing in the parts and machinery, et cetera. If you can flip the company and make a quick sell and enrich yourself, and all of those perverse incentives that have been driven by a form of very strict capitalism that is validated by our legal system, which says that the judgment of whether a CEO has behaved appropriately and is vulnerable to suit or not is this business judgment rule, which assesses whether or not they've been acting in a way that a reasonable person could think improves the lot of who? Shareholders. Not workers, shareholders.
Bree, can I ask you this question?
That's why we're here.
I think that's a good point. And Bree raised this point yesterday when her and I were talking, and I'm going back to the conversation because I've thought a lot about what you and I discussed once I left and went home, and I thought you raised a lot of good points that I never really thought about. And I was thinking to myself, when you raised that point to me about, well, you said, Shermichael, even if you were to have someone on the board, if most of the members decide to sell the company, they're going to sell the company. I said, well, Bree, that is what it is. Majority rules. And you said, but that's not necessarily fair for the workers.
And it's not the majority. It's the majority of the board, not the majority of the people who work there.
I thought about that, and we had some disagreement. And I thought to myself, I said, well, what if the workers also got a percent, Bree, of the sale? Would you be amenable to that?
It's not about whether I would be amenable.
Well, I'm just asking for the conversation, though.
Well, but the workers would assess whether or not it's the benefit for all of them to go ahead and sell the company. If it's enough money, I can see them making that kind of decision. Yeah, but the point is it should be a decision that's made by everybody who's impacted.
Yeah, no, I'm not disagreeing. I'm just trying to see how open you are to what I would perhaps put positive as a reasonable position. The point is that it's a democratic decision so that all of the costs and benefits are spread evenly among the community and not just the cost borne by the workers and the benefits borne by the elite ruler class.
But we should mention that former President Trump blasted Biden ahead of his picket line visit. Trump said in a statement, Joe Biden's draconian and indefensible electric vehicle mandate will annihilate the U.S. auto industry and cost countless thousands of auto workers their jobs. The only thing Biden could say today that would help the striking auto workers is to announce the immediate termination of his ridiculous mandate. Anything else is just a feeble and insulting attempt to distract American labor from this vicious Biden betrayal. I mean, okay. I think that's what's so interesting about labor and the intimacies of the relationships that people develop through the kind of solidaristic actions that they're taking right now, is that somebody sitting on Twitter and saying something or saying something on CNN doesn't have nearly the impact as your union leader who you know and who has been fighting for you to get real wages, who knows what you've been going through, whose hands have been dirty, who sat next to you in the cafeteria and in the locker room. The things that they say matter a lot more. And we've heard what Sean Fain has to say about Donald Trump, but I will remind the audience. He made a statement last week that said, every fiber of our union is being poured into fighting the billionaire class in an economy that enriches people like Donald Trump at the expense of workers. We can't keep electing billionaires and millionaires that don't have any understanding of what it is like to live paycheck to paycheck and struggle to get by and expecting them to solve the problems of the working class. So we'll see who wins out.
But what's interesting to me about that is that Donald Trump does well with working class white voters. And I would imagine that some of those voters in Michigan may potentially be a part of the union. I'm not certain what percent of them agrees with Mr. Fain there. But again, I just go back to this point, in part for the people who are going to be watching this. I do think that there is a way for conservatives to strike the right tone and balance on workers, and I think we have to. I mean, I have another good friend of mine. He's a conservative, and he focuses a lot on climate. I'm a hunter, and he and I have had very long conversations, Bree, on the need for conservatives to have a positive position on the environment, which we once had 60, 70 years ago. Just another example.
Yeah, well, you know, some white working class voters like Trump for culture reasons. And the question is, can you make a case that culture matters more to people who are literally in the middle of a strike? And this is why I think it's so important to have union action, labor action, and people really invested in the economic realities that each political party offers up to it. More Rising after this. Please do stick around.